Good day, everyone. I am Mary Cyrene A. Lerio, and I am here to report to you about Chapter 4, the Economic Environment. So, what is an economic environment? The term economic environment refers to all the external economic factors that influence buying habits of consumers and businesses, and therefore affect the performance of a company. These factors are often beyond a company's control and may be either large scale, the macro, or small scale, micro. Macro factors include employment, unemployment, income, inflation, interest rates, tax rates, currency exchange rate, saving rates, consumer confidence levels, and recessions. Next is the micro factors. This includes the size of the available market, demand for the company's products or services, competition, availability and quality of suppliers, and the reliability of the company's distribution chain. While companies often can't control their economic environment, they can evaluate economic conditions before choosing to enter a particular market or industry or pursue other strategies. Next, we are going to discuss the market characteristics. The main dimensions of a market can be captured by considering variables such as those relating to the population and its various characteristics, infrastructure, and social development. Let us start with population. In general, the larger the population, the bigger the market. However, there is no correlation between income level and population. Low-income countries and oil-rich countries have the largest growth rates. Growth rates have a dual edge. They are good for sales, but bad for world resources. The world population currently standing at 5 billion is experiencing a rapid growth rate. It is expected to reach 7 billion by the end of the century. The strain on world resources is likely to be very large. The distribution of the population is also important. Different age groups have different needs, and population density should mean good market potential. The higher, the better. So under population, we have the income and the consumption patterns. Let's discuss first the income. So income is the most important variable affecting market potential. Markets are not markets without money to spend. The distribution of income is very uneven. In Kenya, the lowest 20% of the population receive less than 3% of national resource. This bimodal distribution of income means marketers must analyze two economies in a country. Per capita measures have therefore many limitations. Per capita judges a country's level of economic development and its degree of modernization, and progress in health, education, and welfare. So half of the world's population lives with an average per capita income of only $270 US dollars. Per capita is usually reflected in US dollars and is only valid for comparison if exchange rates are equal. Exchange rates reflect international goods and services in a country but not domestic consumption. Next is consumption patterns. Depending on the sophistication of a country's data collection system, economic data on consumption patterns can be obtained and analyzed. The share of income spent on necessities will provide an indication of the market's development level as well as an approximation of how much money the consumer has left for other purchases. Engel's law provides some generalizations about consumer spending patterns and are useful generalizations when precise data are not available. They state that as a family's income increases, the percentage spent on food will decrease. The percentage spent on housing and household operations will be roughly constant, and the amount saved or spent on other purchases will increase. Next market characteristic is infrastructure. Infrastructure is a very important element in considering whether to market in a country or not. So for example, transportation. Transportation is really vital. Zambia and Zimbabwe are landlocked and have relatively poor transport facilities. Tanzania, while having direct access to the coast, has also a relatively poor internal rural infrastructure. Chaos can therefore ensure, especially during the rainy season. Without being able to get produce to the point of exportation, countries will suffer poor export performance accordingly. Energy consumption shows the overall industrialization of a society, as does its infrastructure. The less energy is consumed, the less likely the development of the market, resulting into a not too attractive market proposition. Commercial infrastructure is also vital, like banks, accountants, advertising agencies, and other services. Without these transaction facilities, exporting cannot take place. The last market characteristic that we're going to discuss is the impact of the economic environment on social development. Many of the characteristics discussed are important beyond numbers. Economic success comes with a price tag. All the social traumas that were once believed to be endemic only to the West are now hitting other parts of the world as well. Many countries, including the nations of Southeast Asia, were able to achieve double-digit growth for decades while paying scant attention to problems that are now demanding treatment, like infrastructure limits, labor shortages, demands for greater political freedom, environmental destruction, urban congestion, and even the spread of drug addiction. Next, we are going to discuss regional economic integration. It is a process in which two or more countries agree to eliminate economic barriers, with the end goal of enhancing productivity and achieving greater economic interdependence. Regional economic integration has enabled countries to focus on issues that are relevant to their stage of development, as well as encourage trade between neighbors. It has been one of the main economic developments affecting world markets since World War II. Countries have wanted to engage in economic cooperation to use their respective resources more effectively and to provide larger markets for member country producers. There are four main types of regional economic integration: the free trade area, the customs union, common market, and the economic union. First is the free trade area. This is the most basic form of economic cooperation. Member countries remove all barriers to trade between themselves, but are free to independently determine trade policies with non-member nations. An example is the North American Free Trade Agreement. Next is the customs union. This type provides for economic operations as in a free trade zone. Barriers to trade are removed between member countries. The primary difference from the free trade area is that members agree to treat trade with non-members countries in a similar manner. Third is the common market. This type allows for the creation of economically integrated markets between member countries. Trade barriers are removed, as are any restrictions on the movement of labor and capital between member countries. Like customs union, there is a common trade policy for trade with non-member nations. The primary advantage to workers is that they no longer need a visa or work permit to work in another member country of a common market. An example is the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. And lastly, the economic union. This type is created when countries enter into an economic agreement to remove barriers to trade and adopt common economic policies. An example is the European Union. Let's proceed to emerging markets. So ano nga ba yung emerging market? It is a country making an effort to change and improve its economy with the goal of raising its performance to that of the world's more advanced nations. Improved economies can benefit emerging market countries through higher personal income levels and better standards of living. more exports, increased foreign direct investment, and more stable political structures. Developed countries benefit from the development of human and natural resources in emerging markets through increased international trading. Although opinions on which countries are emerging markets differ, the major emerging markets are China, India, Brazil, Russia, Argentina, and Indonesia. So meron tayong 4 characteristics of emerging markets. Una is market volatility, then growth and investment potential, high rates of economic growth, and then the income per capita. First is the market volatility. Market volatility stems from political instability, external price movements, and or supply-demand shocks due to natural calamities. It exposes investors to the risk of fluctuations in exchange rate as well as market performance. Then, growth and investment potential. Emerging markets are often attractive to foreign investors due to the high return on investment they can provide. In the transition from being an agriculture-based economy to a developed economy, countries often require a large influx of capital from foreign sources due to a shortage of domestic capital. Using their competitive advantage, such countries focus on exporting low-cost goods to richer nations, which boosts GDP growth, stock prices, and returns for investors. The third one is the high rates of economic growth. Governments of emerging markets tend to implement policies that favor industrialization and rapid economic growth. Such policies need to lower unemployment, higher disposable income per capita, higher investments, and better infrastructure. On the other hand, developed countries such as the USA, Germany, and Japan experience low rates of economic growth due to early industrialization. And the last characteristics for emerging markets is the income per capita. Emerging markets usually achieve a low middle income per capita relative to other countries due to their independence on agricultural activities. As the economy pursues industrialization and manufacturing activities, income per capita increases with GDP, and lower average incomes also functions as incentive for higher economic growth. For developing markets, there are 5 elements of success required for an international marketer to take advantage of and thrive in developing markets. These are research, creating buying power, tailor local solutions, improve access, and shape aspirations. Let's discuss first the research. So the first order of business is to learn about the needs, aspirations, and habits of targeted populations for whom traditional intelligence gathering may not be the most effective means. So for example, just because the demand for landlines in developing countries was low, it would have been wrong to assume that little demand for phones existed. The real reasons were that landlines were expensive, and subscribers had to wait for months to get hooked up, and lines often went down due to bad maintenance, flooding, and theft of copper cables. Then another element is create buying power. Without credit, it is impossible for many developing country consumers to make major purchases. Programs in microfinance have allowed consumers with no property as collateral to borrow sums averaging $100 to make purchases and have retail banking services available to them. Lenders such as Grameen Bank in Bangladesh and Compartamos in Mexico have helped millions of families to escape poverty. Next element for developing market is the tailor local solutions. So in the product area, companies must combine advanced technologies with local insights. Hindustan Lever, or part of the Unilever, learned that local-income Indians usually forced to settle for low-quality products. They want to buy high-end detergents and personal care products but could not afford them in the quantities available. In response, the company developed extremely low-cost packaging material and other innovations that allowed for a product priced in pennies instead of the $4 to $15 price of the regular containers. The same brand is on all of the product forms regardless of packaging. Given that these consumers do not shop at supermarkets, Lover employs local residents with push carts who take small quantities of the sachet to kiosks. Another is improved access. Due to the economic and physical isolation of poor communities, providing access can lead to a thriving business. In Bangladesh, with income levels of approximately $200, Grameenphone leases access to wireless phones to villagers. Every phone is used by an average of 100 people and generates $90 in revenue a month. So 2 or 3 times the revenues generated by wealthier users who own their phones in urban areas. And the last element for developing market is shape aspirations. The biggest challenges in developing markets are in providing essential services. In this sense, developing markets can be ideal settings for commercial and technological innovation. With significant demand for mobile handsets in developing countries, nauna di ba na-develop yung mga Nokia and Motorola that sells for as little as mga $25 lang siya before. So they are ideally suited to much consumer demand for inexpensive phones with the features, quality, and brand names consumers want. So developing new technologies or products is a source-intensive task and requires knowledge transfers from one market to another. Without multinationals as catalysts, non-governmental organizations, local governments, and communities will continue to flounder in their attempts to bring development to the poorest nations in the world. Ngayon naman, let's discuss economic integration and the international marketer. So, regional economic integration creates opportunities and potential problems for the international marketer. So, it may have an impact on a company's entry mode by favoring direct investment because one of the basic rationales of integration is to generate favorable conditions for local production in intra-regional trade. So by design, larger markets are created with more potential opportunity. Harmonization efforts may result in standardized regulations, which in turn affect production and marketing efforts in a positive manner. Decisions regarding integrating markets must be assessed from 4 different perspectives: the range and impact of changes resulting from integration, the development of strategies to relate to these changes, organizational changes needed to exploit these changes, and the strategies to influence change in a more favorable direction. The first one is the effects of change. So yung unang task is to envision the outcome of the change. Change in the competitive landscape can be dramatic if scale opportunities can be exploited in relatively homogeneous demand conditions. So for example, industrial goods, consumer durables such as cameras and watches, and professional services, the international marketer will have to take into consideration varying degrees of change readiness within the market themselves. So that is the governments and other stakeholders such as labor union may oppose the liberation of competition, especially when national champions such as airlines, automobiles, energy, and telecommunications are concerned. Then, strategic planning. So after determining the effects of change, the international marketer will then have to develop a strategic response to the new environment to maintain a sustainable long-term competitive advantage. So those companies already present in an integrated market should fill in the gaps in European product and market portfolios through acquisition or alliances to create a regional or global company. It is increasingly evident that even regional presence is not sufficient. Companies need to set their sights on presence beyond that. In industries such as automobiles, mobile communications, and retailing, blocks in the 21st century may be dominated by 2 or 3, leaving rooms for niche players. Next is the reorganization. So whatever changes are made, they will require company reorganization. Structurally, authority will have to become more centralized to execute regional programs. In staffing, the focus will have to be on individuals who understand the subtleties of consumer behavior across markets and are therefore available to evaluate the similarities and differences between cultures and markets. In developing systems for the planning and implementation of regional programs, adjustments have to be made to incorporate views throughout the organization. So for example, yung decision for regional advertising campaigns are made at headquarters. So without consultation with country operations, resentment from the local marketing staff could lead to less than optimal execution. Lastly is lobbying. International managers, as change agents, must constantly seek ways to influence the regulatory environment in which they have to operate. Economic integration will create its own powers and procedures similar to those of the EU Commission and its directives. So the international marketer is not powerless to influence the European Union. As a matter of fact, a passive approach may result in competitors gaining an advantage or may put the company at a disadvantage. Many marketers consider lobbying a public relations activity and therefore go beyond the traditional approaches. Lobbying usually have to take place at multiple levels simultaneously. So let's sum up everything that we learned in this chapter 4. So the emergence of economic integration in the world economy possesses unique opportunities for and challenges the international marketer. Eliminating barriers between member markets and erecting new ones vis-a-vis non-members will call for adjustments in past strategies to fully exploit the new situations. So in the late 1980s and the 21st century, economic integration increased substantially. New trading blocs and the expansion of the existing ones will largely depend on future trade liberation and political will within and among countries. As developed markets have matured, marketers are looking at both emerging and developing markets for their future growth. So in order to succeed, marketers will have to be innovative, pioneer new ways of doing business, and outmaneuver local competitors, and many of them intent on becoming global players themselves. Here are the questions for my midterm exam in Chapter 4, the economic environment. Number 1, why is economic environment important? And number 2, what can a marketer do to advance economic integration? Deadline will be on July 2, 2021, and please submit it to my Gmail account, siren400@gmail.com. That ends my report. Thank you.